and welcome to the Kitchen Conversations podcast. My name is Patrycja Rozwora and I'm the host of this platform where we speak about contemporary art from so-called Eastern Europe. In each episode, you're going to be introduced to one artist or researcher whose visual or activist practice sheds light onto the complex former socialist region with all its histories, cultures, languages, foods, but also traumas and their inevitable contemporary consequences. The podcast is a fully independent platform existing since May 2020. If you enjoy the monthly conversations and want to leave me a motivating feedback, you can now go to buymeacoffee.com/kitchenconversations and show your support by buying me a symbolic coffee. All the needed links you can find in the show notes of this episode. Hello and welcome back, dear friends, fans of Eastern European art, but most importantly, new listeners of the podcast. I met my today's guest, Marija Petrovic, a while ago in KFOST, Kunstverein Ost, a Berlin-based art space devoted to art from Central and Eastern Europe. We have been in touch for a while now, and I'm more than happy to finally be able to share with you our conversation. At first, we will speak about her already finalized project, Silver, devoted to a collection of silverware looted by the Nazis from the Jewish German community and today exhibited in the Museum of Arts and Crafts in Hamburg. Later, Marija will also share with us her fresh and ongoing PhD research, where she examines the past and present of Ukraine against the background of decolonial perspectives. I hope you enjoy.
Thank you. I'm Marija. So I'm an artist and researcher, like you said. I grew up in Ukraine in part and also in Germany. I came to Germany when I was 9. So what is central to me in a lot of my work is a sort of in-betweenness that is also very typical for a migrant perspective, but also for questions of belonging and not belonging and cultures, how they shape people, how people shape them. So this is a big part of my interest that kind of grew up my own biography and that I continue to follow throughout different media and in different ways.
And where from in Ukraine are you?
From Dnipro, so from eastern central part of Ukraine.
And you moved here with your family?
With my mom only. So only two of us.
And where did you live in Berlin from the beginning?
No, so first I moved to Schwerin because we...
I don't know where that is.
Yeah, that's absolutely... Well, it's not fine. It's really beautiful. You should go there in the summer. No, so we came as contingency refugees, which was a program opened for Jewish people from the former Soviet countries in Germany, and it started, I think, in the late 90s and ended somewhere in the beginning of the 2000s. And when we came in 2001, a lot of people were already in Germany, so we didn't have the possibility to select a city for us or to decide where we want to go. Not unlike it's now happening also with Ukrainian refugees that arrive now or...
The past years, right?
Exactly, yeah. Where the government or the organizations look at where there's still space for new people to arrive, and then it gets decided based on this data. My mom wanted to go to a bigger city, of course, to find work, but for us it was suggested, or we had to go to Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, either Rostock, Wismar, or Schwerin. And so my mother chose Schwerin because it's the capital of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. Yeah, and I spent 6 years there. It was beautiful. It's a really beautiful city. It was still a bit rough. I think it still is a bit rough, but in the beginning of 2000s, a lot of people were moving away after reunification. It was formerly a very, very rich, I think, part of the region. And it's still very interesting because, for example, in the museum, there's a big collection of Rembrandts, which doesn't make any sense in the province of Schwerin. There's a lot of lakes, there's a lot of forests, and I really enjoyed it. But my mom at some point found work in Hamburg. So we moved to Hamburg when I was 15 and I was devastated. But yeah, I grew up in Hamburg from 15 to until I moved to Berlin. So I also stayed in Hamburg to study art.
Oh, yeah, that was actually my next question because, we know each other for quite some time, but I don't know much about your background. Kind of, I know what you do now. So thanks for sharing. That's very nice. So what was the decision to study art? Why was art something you went for in Hamburg?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I was thinking between philosophy and literature. So my first choice was to study literature and to study poetry. Leipzig was kind of the university that I thought makes more sense for me or most sense for what I want to do. But then I was in Leipzig and I just didn't feel, I didn't want to move to Leipzig for some reason. I don't know why. I was very young.
Didn't vibe.
Yeah, it didn't vibe. It doesn't have a logical reason. I think Leipzig is a very exciting city. Yeah, so with philosophy, I was also a bit frightened about the rigidity of the studies and a bit afraid that it wouldn't give me freedom to follow what I find interesting. And so I decided to go to HFBK because HFBK is also very famous to be very independent. You don't have to do anything, but at the same time, you have a lot of possibilities to also in workshops, for example, or in courses to learn whatever you feel you need most to continue with your work or to establish your work. And I just tried to apply with poetry. And it worked, luckily. In the beginning, I also explored a lot of visual media and sound, and I also stuck a lot with video production and kind of the cinematic language because I found it very interesting. I still write a lot, but the university gave me the possibility to also explore other kinds of languages and other kinds of ways to communicate something, not just through text, which is probably something that I've come back to mainly, but also through cinematic language and also without the inclusion of text. And this is something that I still enjoy a lot and something that HFBK gave me the tools to explore, which I'm very thankful for.
Yeah, you don't hear that often that someone is kind of happy about their studies, or like people are often quite critical. So that's nice. That means like the place was like a good one for you to find your way.
I think there's a lot to criticize, also especially about this very free and independent study. And I think there's also a lot of possibility for people to get lost in it. And also I did get lost in it sometimes as well. Yeah. And it's always more nuanced. But looking back, I think it was a good choice for me personally. So I'm still at HFBK, so I'm doing my PhD there still.
It's nice. And get a sip of your coffee. That's an important one in this morning hours. But in terms of poetry, that's really cool to hear. I always admire people who write poetry. I don't know. I never got to do that. I think I never wrote a poem. But it always seems very, fascinating to me. Did you write then in German?
Yes.
Ukrainian?
Yes. No, I did write in German. So I grew up Russian speaking. I don't speak Ukrainian, which is something that I find very tragic. And of course, I'm able to learn and I'm learning. I try to learn. I understand it quite well, which is surprising considering that I only learned it for maybe 1.5 years because I started to learn it in school in Ukraine and I moved to Germany after 2nd grade. But in some way, I still have a feeling towards the language, which is very nice to see and to experience. But I'm not able to speak. And this is something I'm trying to change. But Dnipro is a very Russian-speaking city. And my family was Russian speaking too. Or my father is in Dnipro right now and he still speaks Russian. But he writes poetry too, and he told me that sometimes now he slips into a bit of Ukrainian.
All right. Wow, that's amazing, right?
It really is, yeah.
I think the first time we met, I came to Kvost. I was like telling you what I do. I was like promoting a bit my podcast. And then you also told me you are working or finalizing a publication, research work titled Silver.
Yeah, so it's a collaborative work with a very good friend of mine and a wonderful artist and ethnographer, scholar, Ofri Lapid. And we met a while ago and started working together almost instantly. And we did some seminars together. So we organized some seminars, and out of previous collaboration, almost by accident, grew out this work. Well, it is centered around the collection of silver of formerly Jewish origin, so-called, in the Arts and Crafts Museum in Hamburg. And at different points in our lives, Ofri and I both worked in this museum and stumbled across this collection and felt some sort of uneasiness about it, or maybe not in a very negative way, but just some interest with how it is presented or what it is. And this silver is part of the 20 tons that were stolen by the Nazis on the onset of World War II from Jewish communities in Hamburg alone. So this happened all over, but in Hamburg alone it was 20 tons approximately.
That's crazy.
It's a lot.
So much.
Yeah.
What is silver? Like, what should we understand by that?
Yeah, so that's the interesting part about it. It's all kinds of silver. So from silver in all forms, but mostly it's cutlery, things that people use for dinners and celebrations, and not necessarily religious, but also, of course, some of them are religious. But the interesting part about this collection is that for some reason in Hamburg, I think it's 2,000 pieces were selected to be kept from being melted down and selected to be held back.
So a lot of it got melted.
Most of it,
for
fueling war economy, probably in various ways
during Second World War.
Yeah.
And some of it was kept.
Some of it was kept. And of course, among it are some very beautiful pieces, some very artistic, crafted. But most of it is just spoons and forks and a lot of ladles, just frighteningly many ladles. Because the thing, what I think maybe frightened me most about ladles is how many ladles does a family have? Like maybe 2, 3 most. I only have 1.
Yeah.
So for hundreds of ladles to be part of a collection, I just have to think how many families got dispossessed. So the ladles freak me out a little bit always. And this collection landed after the war in the Museum of Arts and Crafts, and it formally belongs to the museum, so it's clear. And there were some restitution processes that were extremely complicated after the war, and in many cases unsuccessful. And now the museum has this collection that is, a part of it is exhibited as part of the Raubkunst, Looted Art ? Exhibition that is always present.
But like a permanent exhibition there in the museum.
Yeah, but most of it is still in a depot. And we were really fascinated by the objects because they don't belong in a museum. Of course, a lot of things that are in museums don't belong in museums, but it's also very apparent that the museum doesn't really have the tools to talk about them in a way. So they're really kept as part of the history. It's very apparent that they kind of stick out.
And if you say they do not belong into a museum, what do you mean?
So they're only in a museum because of their history, because they landed in a museum after they were kept from being melted down. Nobody really knows why they were selected and how they were chosen to be kept. So it's still a bit of a mystery, and there are some ideas about it, and also an idea that we propose in the book is also something that's been floating around, is that a lot of times the objects that were dispossessed from Jewish communities were kept as to be evidence to the claimed riches of said community. So they were used as propaganda tools, but we really don't know why exactly hundreds of spoons were kept from being melted down. Yeah, and so this is kind of a very unsettling collection. And of course, it's not the only one of its kind, and we're not claiming that, but what we were trying to do is to find a way to maybe relate to the objects in a way that again brings people together, because what interested us most about it is that they were once part of domestic life and of cultural lives, of everyday lives too. So the very fabric of society kind of was acted out and interacted with them. And so our first idea was to make a dinner by using them for the dinner, just a big dinner for a lot of people, and use the silver. But of course,
to make kind of use of it as the function of that object is, right?
Yeah, to bring them out of their stagnant existence in a museum where they just are kept.
Yeah, collect dust.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, it's not possible.
Because it's a museum exponent. Right?
Yeah, so the moment that objects enter in museum structures, they change their status, and so the whole protocol around them changes. You're not able to touch them. A lot of them are kept in airtight containers, so not the silver, but a lot of museum objects. And there's also a lot of very interesting instructions that can be found on the internet of how to touch objects without touching them a lot. So it's very beautiful pictograms sometimes. And so this whole behavior around them changes. And we wanted to disturb that a little bit in a way that was, of course, possible for us to do. And our way was to think about them, to also have this community moment still. We reenacted the dinners, but without these silver objects, because we were not able to get them, of course. But they were still present because we spoke about them with people. And so we prepared dinners and had conversations around silver and objects, and in museums and
in museums
structures.
The dinners?
No. But objects in museums, but the dinners were private spaces mostly. Yeah.
And what food did you make?
Once I made risotto. And Ofri has a very, very great, I think she made so much, I don't. Blumenkohl?
Cauliflower.
Cauliflower, yes, roasted cauliflower.
Ooh, I like that.
But she also made bread. This I remember.
All fusion foods.
Yeah, a lot of fusion foods. And
so cool. Yeah. I didn't know that you actually did the dinners. And did you invite, for example, people from the museums who work with those objects, or that was kind of too far stretched? So you kept the circle kind of more
so we
close
kept,
to you.
Yeah, we kept the circle close to us, but we still invited people who work in museums, and also artists and researchers who deal with objects and museum structures in their professions. And we also had a reading at the museum, and we also had a conversation with the custodian, and we're in touch with them. We were able to view the depot and view the objects in the depot. And this is also where the pictures, photos in our book are partly from. And also a part of the collection is now in a permanent exhibition in the Jewish Museum here in Berlin. And so a couple of photos are also from this exhibition in the Jewish Museum here.
All right. Mm-hmm. And the publication was a result of the whole research. So you included there some parts of the conversations you had at the table and the photographs.
And also us reaching out into different different histories related to silver, because connecting the silver objects as objects to wider history was also something that we wanted to do, but of course not in a way that undermines their Jewish history. But we wanted to treat them not as coincidental collateral that landed somewhere, but as witnesses of his history. So we wanted to take them more seriously as participants in history as well.
And perhaps a question because I think that's a question that is often addressed in museum collections and with these objects that's kind of are taken from some other cultures and in a way often appropriated to a collection of a given city or country. How are those objects now in the Museum of Hamburg described? If I go there and see the vitrine or the collection, what can I read about those objects? How are they being framed?
I think one very big difference between those objects and a lot of objects from colonial contexts are that ultimately these silver objects are part of Hamburg's history. And they're also part of the museum's history, which is also something, it is German history. That, of course, it's also, the colonial history is also German history, of course. But I think it's still different in a sense that they do belong to Hamburg.
Because the people who those objects belong to were from Hamburg, right?
Yeah,
they were German,
they were
Jewish.
part of Hamburg society.
I assume. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and we spoke also, of course, to a lot of other Jewish people about the project. And the interesting thing is that opinions about what should be done with those objects are very diverse, because some say, oh, they should be given back to the Jewish community, and some say, no, they belong, they are part of German history. They should
stay there.
They should stay there and act as a warning. So I think this is a very big difference, because there is cultural connection that is very, very direct. But it's still, and this is something that we were also a bit unsettled by. It's also a very almost uncanny the way they are portrayed, because it's very different from silver objects that are also part of museum collections but have a different history. So the main vitrine that also interested us the most is organized in a chaotic way. So there's also a big picture in the middle of our book of the vitrine, and it was specifically crafted for these objects. And they're kind of scattered around the vitrine. And usually we're used to objects being meticulously placed in a straight line.
Individually, indeed.
Exactly, so that you can see all of it. But these objects are kind of scattered around, and we described it in our book as if there were remnants after a cheery dinner, just that they're too much constructed. You can feel still that somebody really meticulously tried to
make the chaos.
Make the chaos structured. And so this difference is something that interested us a lot, because the pile is something that is very present in the Holocaust genre, let's say. Something that is piled up as
the imagery.
In the image, right, exactly. To make apparent just how much there is, and so this is something that follows a pattern in a way, and so there's a difference, and we wanted to open it up to discussion and bring it to attention, just that it exists, this is something that there is a difference, and not necessarily say, oh, the museum does it wrong, or not necessarily. We didn't want to just say that something is bad or something. We just wanted to bring to attention that, well, this collection exists, and maybe we need to speak about it more because it's very interesting. It's a very curious case, and it wasn't only done in Hamburg. So throughout whenever the Nazi party advanced, there were dispossessions of all kinds of belongings.
Oh, great research. Very, very interesting. Super happy to hear more about it now. And please tell me, where can people get hands on the publication?
So they can buy it in the bookstore in the Arts and Crafts Museum in Hamburg, or they can order it through Material Verlag.
Cool, I will link it in the show notes.
Thank you.
And now following your next research, your PhD, you are 1 year through it. It's a 4-year program, you said, and you are researching decolonial perspectives of Ukraine. Huge topic, a very important one, a very current one. Please tell me more about it.
Yeah, my research is structured along, I think, maybe 2 big topics. Sometimes I speak of 3, but now I'm more comfortable with saying 2. It always changes. Maybe sometimes it will be 5. And the first part is a more phenomenological analysis or research on vulnerability and on structural qualities of vulnerability, which is something that I've been researching for a while now, and also wrote my master's thesis on vulnerability as kind of an entrance into this huge topic. But what interests me a lot in vulnerability is structure of it, because vulnerability has or is often seen as something that is politically defined, which I think is also very important. So vulnerability is distributed very unequally throughout societies based on socioeconomic factors. And this is called situational vulnerability. And it has played a big role in feminist theory, in intersectional theory, of course, and also in theory of law. But there's also ontological vulnerability that is kind of the basis of being able to be touched or moved I think in very different ways, but also a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have bodies and that we can be in relation to one another. And what I'm interested in is to connect these 2 forms of vulnerability, because if I can be touched, I can also be hurt. So there's a spectrum of interaction. There's a spectrum of relationships that often, unfortunately, based on socio-political factors, can turn violent, or often does turn violent. What interests me a lot is this kind of space of in-betweenness where contact happens, and to analyze where borders between something that is mine and something that is outside of me, where this kind of contact happens. So if there even is some sort of a clear border that we can draw, or if there's some zone of interrelation that changes maybe sometimes. So this in-betweenness is something that I'm very much interested in. And this is the first part, the philosophical part of it. And the decolonial analysis of Ukrainian culture or experience for me is also defined by a space of betweenness. Of course, this war that is happening right now is a colonial war, as is very importantly always pointed out by Timothy Snyder, who is a very important historian and also very important for Ukrainians, I think, because he was one of the first to actually define it as a colonial.
Address such. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, yeah. And also to concentrate on Ukraine, not only in relation to Russia or by looking at Russia and speaking of Ukraine in kind of passing, but really concentrate on Ukraine as a center of where history happened, and the in-betweenness of Ukraine.
Between?
Yeah, between, of course, Russia, the Russian Empire for centuries now, but also the West. And Ukraine caught in between those two empires and two systems, two structures, trying to impose their own narratives over Ukraine. And also something that I think is very important that Timothy Snyder talks about a lot is that the Second World War and Hitler's plans for Ukraine were also colonial plans. And I think the in-betweenness of two empires and an identity forming, a national identity forming, an own national identity forming despite them, and also under influence of them and under changing influence of them, I think is something that interests me a lot. And of course, my own biography is that of a Jewish Ukrainian. So again, this is something that I see as very important as a sort of in-betweenness of two different histories that are actually one history. That is actually, there is a huge Jewish history in Ukraine, which is very important. And for me, it's also important to address it. Why I'm also referring to the term decolonial is because I think that it's very important to speak of Ukraine as colonized, as formerly colonized, and this war as a colonial war. But at the same time, I think that it's also important to not only equate the situation in Eastern Europe and Ukraine specifically to the formerly colonized countries of the so-called global South. And I think there needs to be a different perspective that is specific to Eastern Europe and because I think the situation is different. And in the text that I gave you, that I wrote for the publication of the HFBK of Lerchenfeld magazine recently, I speak about that one of those very important, I think, distinctions is the factor of race. Because when we speak of Ukraine, so of course there was a lot of racial tensions in Soviet occupation, under Soviet occupation. But when it comes to Ukraine, what is also happening now is that from Russia and directly by Putin, the otherness of Ukrainians is completely negated. So it's not accepted that there is such a thing as Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian language, and Ukrainians are treated as Russians. And I think, and this is a colonial gesture, it is oppression, and at the same time it is distinct, because the sameness doesn't grant, or this proposed sameness doesn't grant any privileges. It's used to justify destruction of everything that is Ukrainian, because it cannot exist. So this is, for example, one part of what I'm looking at. And so there, propaganda, for example, plays a very big role.
And the portraying of all the countries that were occupied by the Soviet Union as one.
Yeah, and also I do not want to look a lot at Russian culture, because I think there has been a lot of space taken by Russian culture in...
It's time for portraying some other cultures.
Yeah, but of course, definitely. So I probably will not be doing that. But of course, this erasure plays also a big role in Russian literature, for example, in Russian culture that I personally also, to a big part, grew up with. Still, only a couple of years ago, started to really see as how present and how omnipresent it was, to how this erasure was everywhere in
your growing up and your socialization.
Yeah,
fascinating. I'm very curious. Yeah. What else will come in the next years, and perhaps we can meet when you finish the PhD to see what you worked on and how it turned out. Very, very curious about that. And thanks for, as I said, sharing, the beginning of it all. So, last but not least, I would like to speak about food as it's already a tradition on Kitchen Conversations. And today we are actually at a table where I usually eat. So it's kind of nice. What's your favorite home food, Marija?
So I have two.
You were prepared for the question.
So I tried to think yesterday, and I thought, I will need to think of it for such a long time. But then it was so clear that there's two, and I cannot decide. So one is Deruny or latkes.
I don't know about
that.
It.
I knew as draniki or latkes because Deruny in Ukrainian it's kartoffelpuffer. I don't know the English word for it.
Yeah, the draniki would be more Belarusian, right?
Yeah.
So like potato
shredded potatoes,
pancakes,
and
kind of. How do you eat that? Sweet or savory? Because I think there's two different.
I'm more a savory person.
Nice. Ooh, I love doing this. We also have those in Poland.
I think
placki ziemniaczane. We call them.
Nice.
But we eat them like half-half. So I eat them with like schmand, sour cream, and sugar.
Wow.
So it's kind of like
it's next level.
Yeah.
So latkes are traditionally, or at least the way that I know them, eaten with applesauce. But I'm allergic to apples, and I wasn't fond of apples when I was little. Even though we had an apple tree in the garden, it was a tragedy. I wasn't able to eat the apples from our garden. So I always ate them savory and not without sugar. Yeah, and the second one is Chebureki, which I don't know if you're familiar. It's a traditional Crimean street food. And I spent all my summers in Crimea when I was little. And I was never allowed to eat them because they're deep fried. It's deep fried meat. My mom didn't allow me.
For health reasons?
For health reasons, yeah. Which is understandable, but and
sad for the taste, sad. I guess.
Very sad, and of course, in my mind, it grew into something very big, and I wanted to try them because I wasn't allowed to, and I needed to try them. And so, finally, right before we moved to Germany, I was at a summer camp in Crimea without my mother, and I had very little pocket money. But I tried them, and for a moment I was very nervous because I pictured them to be the best thing that I've eaten so far, and I was a bit, because I didn't have a lot of pocket money, and I was hoping that it was worth it, but it was heavenly. And it was the best thing that I ate.
Did you have them since, or you just kept them
once,
in there?
But I kept them in my memory, and now I am dreaming of having them in a liberated Crimea again. So no, I think it needs to happen.
That's a beautiful way to end up this podcast, I think. And this was it for today. Thank you for reaching till the end of this episode. The next one is coming in 4 weeks, always on Monday. Please follow the podcast and leave a rating. I'm also happy to hear your feedback, so feel free to write me via Instagram or by email. All the needed info you will find in the show notes of this episode. In the meantime, take good care, and we hear each other soon.